from the corridors of power to the crucible of crisis. Britain's prime ministers have shaped not just a nation, but the world. Their legacies are a heady mix of vision, controversy, and the cost of leadership. Chapter 1. Robert Walpole, the first Prime Minister. Commonly regarded as Britain's first Prime Minister, Robert Walpole served from 1721 to 1742 and established the foundations of the office. He guided the country through a period of stability and economic growth after years of turmoil. His mastery of Parliament and political maneuvering made him a formidable force. His tenure was marred by persistent allegations of corruption and patronage. Walpole narrowly avoided impeachment for his involvement in the South Sea Bubble financial scandal in 1720 and 1721, a near catastrophe that could have ended his career. He constructed the magnificent Houghton Hall, completed in 1735, with critics alleging he used public funds for personal grandeur. His open affair with Maria Scarrett, who lived with him at 10 Downing Street before their 1738 marriage, scandalized society. Ultimately, resentment of his iron-fisted rule led to his ousting by a parliamentary coup, the first of its kind. Even after his fall, Walpole's legacy was so divisive that his successors spent years untangling the web of debts and favors he left behind, setting a precedent for the political and financial headaches inherited by those who followed. Chapter 2. William Pitt, the Younger, the Boy Wonder, ascending to power at just 24 in 1783. William Pitt, the Younger, steered Britain through the Napoleonic Wars from 1793 to 1806, reformed the tax system, and stabilized national finances. His era was fraught with shortcomings. Pitt's inability to secure Catholic emancipation, prompting his 1801 resignation, disappointed many, while his war policies left Britain burdened with debt and unrest. His struggle with alcoholism contributed to his early death at 46 in 1806. And he died so impoverished that friends paid for his funeral. His close, possibly romantic friendship with William Wilberforce was the subject of much gossip in the 1790s. Most damning, Pitt's gagging acts from 1795 to 1799 crushed free speech and protest, setting a chilling precedent for government repression. In his final years, Pitt's government was so plagued by internal dissent and public disillusionment that his once bright promise faded into a cautionary tale of youthful brilliance, undone by the burdens of power. Chapter 3. Earl Grey, the reluctant reformer. Earl Grey's legacy is forever tied to the Great Reform Act of 1832, which began Britain's journey toward democracy. His government expanded the electorate and addressed deep-seated inequalities, but the reforms left many working-class people disenfranchised and failed to quell social unrest, as seen in the Bristol riots of 1831. Grey's administration was rocked by a sex scandal in 1832 involving Lord Melbourne, threatening his fragile coalition. The origins of Earl Grey tea are shrouded in mystery, supposedly a diplomatic gift from China in the 1830s. Grey also fathered at least 10 illegitimate children with Georgiana Cavendish, Duchess of Devonshire. Despite his reformist image, Grey's government brutally punished the Tolpuddle martyrs in 1834, sentencing 6 farm workers to transportation for forming a union, a stark reminder of the limits of his liberalism. His inability to address the grinding poverty and unrest of the industrial age left a vacuum that would haunt his successors, demanding ever more radical solutions. Chapter 4. Benjamin Disraeli, the Empire Builder. Benjamin Disraeli, master of political theater, championed imperial expansion and passed the Second Reform Act in 1867, broadening the franchise. His vision of a global Britain inspired many, but his legacy is fraught with controversy. Disraeli's imperialist ambitions led to costly entanglements, such as the Second Anglo-Afghan War from 1878 to 1880, and his reforms often served political ends. In 1875, he secretly borrowed from the Rothschilds to buy Suez Canal shares, nearly causing a constitutional crisis. As the only British Prime Minister of Jewish birth, converted in 1817, Disraeli also penned best-selling novels like Sybil in 1845, satirizing rivals. His disastrous handling of the Zulu War in 1879, culminating in the Isandlwana massacre, left his imperial dreams bloodstained. In the twilight of his career, Disraeli's health and influence waned so dramatically that he was mocked as a ghost in Downing Street. a warning to all who would chase glory at the empire's edge. Chapter 5. William Ewart, Gladstone the Grand Old Man. Gladstone's 4 terms spanned from 1868 to 1894 and were marked by sweeping reforms. From the Elementary Education Act in 1870 through to civil service modernization, a passionate advocate for Irish Home Rule. First bill in 1886, Gladstone's moralistic style often alienated colleagues, and his repeated failures split his party and left Ireland's issues unresolved. His obsession with rescuing prostitutes, especially in the 1840s to 1860s, was widely mocked, and he kept detailed diaries of his missions. His rivalry with Disraeli was so intense that they refused to speak in Parliament, fueling decades of drama. Yet, his government's harsh suppression of the Gordon riots in 1881, with troops firing on civilians, tarnished his humanitarian image. In his final years, Gladstone's relentless pursuit of moral causes left him increasingly isolated, his vision for Ireland and the empire ultimately unfulfilled, and his party fractured for a generation. Chapter 6. David Lloyd George, the People's Champion. Lloyd George led Britain to victory in World War I from 1916 to 1918 and introduced social welfare reforms like the National Insurance Act in 1911. His charisma dominated the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. But his later years were tainted by scandal and failure to address post-war unemployment. The Lloyd George honor scandal from 1916 to 1922 saw him sell peerages for cash, prompting the Honest Prevention of Abuses Act in 1925. His numerous affairs, notably with Frances Stevenson from 1911, were an open secret. King George V called him a thoroughly dangerous little man in 1917. Most damning, his black and tans policy in Ireland from 1920 to 1921 unleashed violence and terror that still haunts Anglo-Irish relations. By the end, Lloyd George's own party had abandoned him, and he left office as a political pariah, his reputation as a man of the people forever shadowed by the chaos he left behind. Chapter 7. Winston Churchill, The Lion's Roar. Churchill's indomitable spirit and stirring oratory made him the face of British resistance in World War II from 1940 to 1945. His legacy is deeply complex. He opposed Indian independence, and his policies during the Bengal famine of 1943, when up to 3 million died, have drawn accusations of catastrophic neglect. Blamed for the Gallipoli disaster in 1915 and seen as out of touch post-war from 1951 to 1955, Churchill also ordered troops against miners in the Tony Pandy riots in 1910 and supported chemical weapons in the Middle East in the 1920s. His eccentric habits, working from bed in a silk gown, became legend. The Bengal famine remains the darkest shadow, with some historians accusing him of outright racism. In his final years, Churchill's refusal to relinquish power despite failing health led to a government adrift, a stark contrast to the wartime dynamism that once defined him. Chapter 8. Clement Attlee, the Quiet Revolutionary. Created the NHS in 1948, expanded the welfare state, and nationalized industries. His government managed post-war recovery but imposed austerity and rationing until 1954. And nationalization bred inefficiency. Attlee oversaw the rushed partition of India in 1947, sparking mass violence and a refugee crisis. Famously reserved, he once prompted King George VI to joke, "Mr. Attlee, I see you are still here." Many Labour MPs doubted his leadership in the 1930s and 1940s, most chilling. His government's forced repatriation of Cossack prisoners to Stalin's USSR from 1945 to 1947, many to certain death, remains a little-known stain on his record. As the Cold War dawned, Attlee's government was rocked by the exposure of Soviet spies in Whitehall, raising fears that the very heart of Britain's new order was riddled with betrayal. Chapter 9. Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady. Thatcher's free market revolution and union busting from 1979 to 1990 reshaped Britain, inspiring both admiration and fierce opposition. Her policies revitalized some sectors but devastated traditional industries, causing high unemployment and social division. The poll tax in 1990 sparked riots and her own party's revolt. She survived the 1984 IRA Brighton bombing and was famously close to Ronald Reagan, sometimes to Britain's detriment, especially during the 1986 U.S. bombing of Libya. Most damning, her refusal to sanction apartheid South Africa in the 1980s. Calling the ANC terrorists left her isolated and on the wrong side of history. In her final days, even her closest allies turned against her, and she left Downing Street in tears, her iron will finally broken by the very party she had dominated for over a decade. Chapter 10. Tony Blair, the Modernizer. Blair's New Labour from 1997 to 2007 brought devolution, the Scotland Act 1998, the Government of Wales Act 1998, and the Human Rights Act 1998. Also, the Good Friday Agreement of 1998. Early optimism gave way to controversy as the Iraq War in 2003 cast a long shadow with the Chilcot inquiry in 2016, finding he exaggerated the threat posed by Iraq. Blair was the first prime minister questioned by police in the Cash for Honors scandal from 2006 to 2007. His conversion to Catholicism in 2007 surprised many, as did his Yo Blair moment with George W. Bush in 2006. Tony Blair's government expanded the use of quangos, giving them significant power over public services. Critics argue this led to less accountability, increased bureaucracy, and wasteful spending. Many believe Blair's reliance on quangos undermined democratic oversight, diluted ministerial responsibility, and contributed to inefficiency in UK governance. The Blair government also adopted more open borders policies, increasing immigration to the UK. Supporters saw economic benefits, but critics argue this led to social strain, pressure on public services, and cultural tensions. Many believe Blair's approach to immigration changed the country's demographics and fueled ongoing debates about national identity. The Iraq War's human cost and shattered trust may remain his ultimate legacy. Chapter 11. Modern Britain. When browsing social media on platforms such as X, there are demonstrable, strong public feelings of resentment and dissatisfaction towards the current political regime. In the years since Blair's vision for the future, the British people feel their country's values. Ethics and morals are being undermined, ignored, and punished by an increasingly authoritarian state. The Vice President of America, J.D. Vance, famously called out Keir Starmer on national TV, February 27, 2025, in the Oval Office. Starmer infamously denied his alleged attack on free speech in the UK. In conclusion, across 3 centuries, these 10 prime ministers form a vivid tapestry of British leadership, each a product of their era, yet all bound by the intoxicating burdens of power. Walpole and Pitt the Younger, architects of the modern premiership, wielded influence through cunning, patronage, and at times repression, setting a precedent for the balancing act between stability and liberty. Reformers like Grey and Gladstone, though separated by decades, shared a zeal for progress, yet both faltered when their ideals collided with the entrenched interests and harsh realities of their times. Disraeli and Lloyd George, flamboyant and controversial, thrived on charisma and spectacle, their legacies forever entwined with both dazzling achievements and scandals that shook the establishment. Churchill and Attlee, wartime titans, stand as opposites, one a symbol of indomitable will and imperial nostalgia, the other a quiet revolutionary who rebuilt a nation from the ashes, yet both were forced to make decisions that left indelible scars. Thatcher and Blair, the modernizers, appended the status quo with radical visions, one with iron resolve and market dogma, the other with the seductive promise of a third way, yet both ultimately faced the perils of hubris and the wrath of a divided public. What unites them is not ideology, for they span the spectrum from conservative to radical, but the paradox of leadership itself, the capacity to inspire and to alienate, to build and to destroy, to be both the architects of hope and the authors of controversy. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more. This video is for informational and entertainment purposes only. The views expressed are solely those of the creator and do not represent any affiliated organizations. Nothing in this video should be taken as professional advice. Viewers are responsible for their own actions. Use your own judgment and verify information independently.